In this video, I would like to share with you the stages of grieving that I've gone through. These are put together by KUBLER-ROSS grief cycle, and that's the one I'm following is a 5 stages of grief. I went through this as a university student, and I've come back to it time and again, realizing that as I've gone through a physical illness, through chronic disease, I've also had some challenges with my mental health. And the grieving process is really important to understand as I go through this journey and realize all the losses of what I was able to do in the past and what I'm able to do now, and going through that and reforming my sense of purpose and meaning. And so without further ado, let's jump into the stages of grieving. Just to give a quick overview, the first stage is called denial. The second stage is called anger, the third, bargaining, the fourth, depression, and the fifth, acceptance. And so starting with denial, this is the stage where for the longest time, my symptoms became worse and worse. I was not having as much energy for sport. I couldn't keep up with my peers. No longer could I keep up even with my work peers, whether it was in a university setting and eventually into a writing opportunity where I was writing for a blog online for students for 10 years, but eventually I couldn't even keep up there. And so there's just these levels of dysfunction and then eventual needing to withdraw from work altogether. And so, but for the longest time, for probably since my first times working in the university context, I was really struggling with my energy, and I just kind of deny it, just kind of push through, figure I needed to work out more, drink more coffee, just try my best to keep up to my peers. And so there was a lot of avoidance in my denial of my condition. There was also confusion. I didn't know what was wrong with my body. There was no awareness I had of anything called chronic fatigue syndrome for many, many years. There was no sense where I could explain why I would go into such a sick feeling state after physical exertion, but also why I couldn't keep up to my peers in terms of playing even games, especially if it was requiring mental exertion, and say, for example, a detective game or something like that. But also following instructions, I was just never good at, and learning new things I felt like there was a long learning curve. And so there's this confusion around my symptoms and how slow I was, and a lot of fear, like, how am I going to keep up this work until I retire? There's no way I'm going to have energy to do that, and to especially adding a family into that situation where my wife and I started a family together and have 3 children, and they're growing. How do I even survive the next day, the next week, let alone years of working at this pace? And so I was in a state of denial at first. Then I shifted a lot to anger, the next stage. And that was where I experienced a lot of frustration. There was just so much frustration with my body that it was so non-responsive to what I wanted it to do in sport. That I would just fatigue and crash so soon in any sports I would play. Also, I would just not do as well academically and seem to lack concentration skill, and also seem to lack retaining information. I was always in awe of other people who seemed to just have a knack for remembering history or anything they've studied. I just couldn't remember it. And along with that, when I especially go into a crash state where my energy would be completely sapped, when I would just coil up in bed and just try to rest, I would be extremely irritable. Light would be irritating, sounds, loud sounds, anything. I just wanted to be alone and quiet. And so these are some times during that onset of the anger where anxiety kept coming into that increased anxiety of how will I survive the workplace, to provide for my family, to have a reputation amongst my peers as at least one who contributes and can be thought of and respected. The First stage then was denial, then anger, now bargaining. And this is where I really struggled to find meaning. When I had to pull away from work the first time, it was a struggle. I wasn't even aware that my regional director at the time said, well, you could take a medical leave, and then he chose to actually say, I want you to take a medical leave for 6 months. And I was excited to have the responsibilities taken off me. It was like a great weight lifted off of my anxiety and my worries and the multiple things to do that I was feeling more and more dysfunctional about. But at the same time, it caused a real sense of panic in my identity. I was connected to all these people. I was feeling important in my position. I felt like a meaningful role in helping students to know about Jesus and to help their friends know Jesus as well. But increasingly, I wasn't doing that anymore. And then besides that, I had nothing to do. I was on a medical leave. And so I had a lot of time alone. I had a lot of time to consider what I was not able to do anymore. And those subsequent medical leaves that I took were oftentimes a reflection to struggle to find meaning. But eventually, being on long-term disability was even more so that, because now work was completely out of the picture. And that's where I just had to reach out to others. I had to reach out to friends as support in prayer and just sharing when I'm having a bad time. My wife has been a true support to me, even my family, extended family. And so it's just important to reach out to others, to let them know you're hurting and you're struggling. But I was really struggling to find meaning. I had found so much meaning in work, in being part of a team, in having an important purpose of helping students know Jesus and to change the world with what it means to know Jesus Christ personally. But then what also came through that too is just opportunities to tell my story. So I had to tell my story to my doctor. I had to tell it to my psychologist. I had to tell it to insurance companies. And most importantly, I had to tell it to friends and to extended friends and family. But also too, I had the opportunity to share up front a couple of times in my church. And those were extremely challenging times for me, but very good, because it really forced me to really think through and really hone what was going on in my soul and where I got my identity from before and where I am seeking my identity now in Christ and His grace and His goodness towards me, versus before it was a lot of my performance and what I could accomplish and my sense of worthiness because of what I could accomplish. And so this is where I spent a lot of time, and I still spend a lot of time finding meaning, because I get trapped oftentimes in feeling down and depressed, that I haven't been able to do my dreams and my expectations or even maintain them or to maintain my former way of life. But in telling my story, it helped me process and to search for meaning in different ways. The next stage is depression, and my first diagnoses were actually depression. And so I think it was interesting that I was diagnosed with depression far before chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia. And these were just feelings of feeling overwhelmed. I remember even as a teenager, just sometimes feeling that sense of stress and of school expectations, of familial and social expectations. I felt social anxiety and just depressed at how lousy I was at being social, and also eventually lousy at being good at school and academics as well, as my family made a move to a smaller town where the curriculum was very different and I never did get my traction in subjects like chemistry and even English. It was just so overwhelming for me. And I felt helpless in those situations, and I often still do when I'm, especially in times of crashing and just don't have energy to do anything or any motivation. And there's also that sense of temptation to flight as well. I just want to escape. And so there's so many things we can escape to in our culture. It could be travel, it could be entertainment, it could be so many different things that we can escape to. And even in this stage of depression, I had definitely a lot of suicidal ideation. I never followed through, but also often felt like I just don't want to live anymore. I don't feel like I want to live because it's just so painful. The my body, my sense of angst, my sense of just fatigue. Everything is just gray and not enjoyable. I'm just going through the motions, and things aren't things I'm looking forward to. They're things I'm more dreading because I don't know if I'll have enough energy for it. And so lots of things I formerly enjoyed now become, I'm anxious about, or I'm dreading. And so there's a lot of depression over things lost. This is a very heavy stage of the grieving process. And finally, the last stage is acceptance. And this is where you're coming out of that depression, out of that bargaining and finding meaning, more out of the anger and more out of the denial, and accepting now that I've been diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome and also fibromyalgia, and also along with that mental illness of generalized anxiety and depression. And it takes a lot of courage to actually share this with you on a video. And so I hope you can appreciate that it's not easy for me to share these things with you. It's not my first choice of what I would like to share on YouTube with others. I'm doing this purely only because I think there's others out there who might be able to identify with my story and the grieving process, and hopefully it can help you understand that there is a grieving process we need to be aware of, and to identify where you are in that stage of the grieving process. And so the last one, exploring options, is where I've been reframing what my life meaning is. So instead of having all these goals for work, I can still be productive. I might not be able to work full-time or even part-time at this time, but I can make a video. And so I learned how to post videos on YouTube, and learning how to make meaning of my life to help others. And so having these new plans, these new dreams, I would have never been doing this had I been working before. And a bit of a sense too of moving on, that I can't keep going back to wish I could live in what I could do before, because I just can't. And I've had so many years now, like decades, of not being able to go back, that it's fairly evident that I should just accept my limitations and do what I can, and it's time to move on to different things. And so my lifetime dream was to be a lifer, to be a staff worker in a Christian organization called Power to Change, to be on campus and to work with students and help them reach their friends, but also to do a lot of traveling for missions projects and such to help other people in different countries. That was my lifetime dream. And when I had that dream and it was going so well for a while, and then it sort of went off the rails, it was very hard to let that dream die. And I went through a lot of grieving, and still do, that I can't keep up to those dreams and that opportunity to be with my peers and working together with them. But at the same time, God is showing me that, wow, maybe he has a different plan. Not the plan I would have chosen by any means. Not a fun route to go. I would far rather have it all together and be able to do all these things and have energy and to do all those things I did before. But I can see how God's carving out these opportunities for me to relate to people who are broken. I have neighbors who are struggling with health because of age or through concussions, and just that sense of my focus of ministry is very different now. It's more out of weakness, out of my brokenness, out of my denial, out of my anger, out of my bargaining, out of my depression, out of my learning to accept my weaknesses and brokenness, that God is putting his grace through me and ministering to others. So I hope that you can understand these stages of grief, and I will try to put them in the video so that you can see them visually at some points as well. And hopefully this has been helpful. And I really do pray with you that God would help you through this grieving process. I know that Jesus went through an insane amount of grieving. If you can imagine a young man of 33 years old and such a prominent public figure, so much on the up and up for him, and yet how it was his time. He gave up his life. It wasn't only because the religious leaders and the Romans at the time plan to crucify him, but it was also his own will to be crucified, and God's will as well. And so he went through this stages of grief, much more than I will ever imagine. And so that gives me comfort in the midst of my grieving. And I think too, for those who are possibly not grieving at this time, maybe this is helpful for you to understand the processes of grieving and what in particular a person with CFS and fibromyalgia feels. Yeah, definitely way more loss than you can comprehend in a video that's only this short. But it affects every area of life. And I think one of the challenges I find is that sometimes the more prominent diseases that are more terminal get a lot more focus, and I can understand that. Like, it has its place to have reverence and heaviness, but oftentimes, yeah, we're fearful of disease that will be terminal, that will end in death. But sometimes these chronic illnesses, it's kind of tricky because there isn't that imminent fear of death, but there's almost that sense of the fear of living. There's that fear of not living while you're alive, that you lose a lot of your joy and a lot of your happiness and a lot of your even ability to get out and enjoy life. And so this is something that I grapple with a lot. I feel like sometimes like I'm the living dead, because I just, I'm so fatigued and headachy and body achy that it's like, you trying to go through life with an extreme headache, with the flu, with COVID-like symptoms, 24/7, 7 days a week, every day, every year. It's just kind of a different way to approach life. And so, yeah, grieving, it's important to understand. It's important to understand where you are in the process, but also that it's normal. This is being human, and all of us have to go through some form of grief. And so it's good to learn it and to learn how to apply it. God bless.